Fantastic. So it looks like everyone's come through. We have a number of people from a couple of different industries I can see on the list today, but initially I'd like to welcome our guest speaker on behalf of Vegetables WA and everyone who's attending today. We have the enormously knowledgeable Marsha Arala with us. I am sorry, Marsha, I knew I was going to do that wrong. Marsha is with Fair Farms and has been with GrowCom for a period of time. She comes from the background of a policy with government departments, especially Queensland, and also does do a lot of work around our Kununurra area as well, which is obviously super helpful to our WA growers. The Fair Farms is obviously quite an important deal, and it is becoming more and more widespread around Australia, and it is something that we are also looking to encourage as well. So by all means, I will pass it over to Marsha, who is going to keep us informed, and any questions, if you'd like to pop them into the chat, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So if you could keep the questions till then, that would be appreciated. Thanks very much, Marsha.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks WA for joining me. Yeah, by background, I actually graduated, my undergraduate was at Curtin University, and I spent a fair chunk of my life. I came over to Brisbane after spending another 5 years in Perth in WA, and it was fun to return to WA after spending 8 years in the Middle East, but coming back rather than a uni student at Curtin, I came back as a parent and re-looked at all of the suburbs of WA differently in terms of not where the easiest pubs and the like were, but where to raise children. So I've now moved back to Brisbane, and it gives me great pleasure to implement the national program Fair Farms, not only through Queensland, but through all of Australia. So let's go for a little introduction to Fair Farms. As you can see, it's designed and developed by GrowCom, who has a long history with the horticulture industry at 90 plus years with the Queensland growers, and it has been supported with by funding with Fair Work Ombudsman, the Federal Department of Agriculture, and some seed money from AusVeg. So it's heavily backed by industry and for industry. Now, why won't my page down? Why won't my slides progress? There we go. So it was kind of developed, it's born out of a need for industry to show that fair work practices exist in our horticulture industry and are expected by all. I don't know if you recall, but in 2017, there was a bit of a blitzkrieg by Fair Work Ombudsman, in which this harvest trail inquiry resulted, and inspectors completed, some more than 800 odd investigations involving 444 growers and almost 200 labour hire contractors throughout all states of Australia and the Northern Territory. And as a result, Fair Work Ombudsman recovered over $1 million in underpayments for more than 2,500 employees. So they were unable to assess the full extent of underpayments in many cases due to issues such as poor record keeping, cash payments, and transient workforce. But the full extent of underpayments is significantly higher than what they were to recover. So in response to that, Fair Farms was developed over 18 months of intense negotiations and discussion and a coming together of market forces, government and industry. And this is industry's led response to demonstrating that ethical practices do occur within the horticulture industry, and we can create a level playing field to ensure a sustainable future for all of Australian horticulture. So from the negotiations and consultations that ensued, the industry standard, the Fair Farm Standard, which is available on our website, was developed. And this took a lot of nitty-gritty and negotiations, because it's benchmarked to legislation and is the heart and soul of the Fair Farms training and certification program. So it can be broken down into management practices and fair and responsible employment practices, and it all starts with the standard. So this, the Fair Farm Standard, is linked to both fair work, workplace health and safety, and migration legislative requirements, as well as being what market drivers are seeing as their minimum requirements. So that's why it took intense negotiation for this to result. The first version is June 2019, and we look to having that stand still for a while so everyone can understand the standard, audit against the standard, be trained against the standard, but we are a relatively young program in that it has been 18 months since the Fair Farms was launched in June 2019. So we are aware of some areas of improvement and the like, but so far it has demonstrated, has been a really good starting point for awareness of those three key pieces of legislation, as well as the market and consumer demands of what it is to be a fair and decent employer. So the layout of the standard is quite similar to Fresh Care, and again, this was important to our growers who are looking at implementing that. So it's a straightforward kind of tabular presentation where the first column is what you need to be achieving, and if you are already achieving that and having your own practices in place, and you can demonstrate that you're meeting those outcomes, then you don't even really need to look further. The second column explains the means of compliance, and then there's references of Fair Work Ombudsman or references websites and the like, where the resources can be used to, freely available resources can be used to meet that. We don't prescribe, say, a policy template or specific documentation, because really it is an outcomes-based industry standard in which we want to raise the bar of awareness for ethical practices, and then how you implement those would be fit for purpose for your business. So it is about kind of shifting the needle gradually and sustainably to achieving the outcomes required by the standard. Nexty. So to give you a quick kind of run through of the pathway to Fair Farms training, as I said, it all starts with the standard itself. So the standard is available on our Fair Farms website. A participant such as yourselves, growers and the like would register through the Fair Farms website. So it's 150 plus GSs, 165. You register to enrol in the Fair Farms training and certification pathway there. That would then open up your My Fair Farms portal, in which you proceed with an online self-assessment. So the online self-assessment, again, gives you the opportunity to be aware of all the obligations. So it's a 200 or 300 question survey or questionnaire, in which oftentimes the answers to the question are in the question. So do you have policies and practices in place to deal with bullying, harassment or discrimination? So if you don't, the answers are kind of there in the question. So you could, prepare your to-do list based on that. But the importance of the online self-assessment is that it is, again, linked to legislation. So depending on where you have registered from in your state and territory, it will link you to the right state and territory online self-assessment for you to answer. And it's your opportunity to take an honest and frank look at your own practices. The self-assessment, as I mentioned, is a couple of hundred questions. So you do it at a time when you have time, and with all of your policies and practices, bring them with you and a strong cup of coffee whilst you do the online self-assessment. It should be done by you, the business owner, or you, the HR manager of that business, not by a consultant who will then sell you a package of policies. That's indeed not at all what we're trying to achieve. And because the online self-assessment and registration is linked to your business, where we ask a number of kind of profile questions in terms of how many workers you have, what crops you produce, what commodities you produce, what seasonality. We really are trying to understand and make this as practical as possible, and don't want consultant creep, as I've mentioned, because you should be taking an honest look at your own practices on farm. That's what the Fair Farms training certification program is about. So you can certainly do it with assistance, and we've had some aggregators of commodities and peak industry bodies assist their members, but it should be the individual growers themselves who do the online self-assessment, because they are taking responsibility for their practices on farm. The importance of the online self-assessment, as I mentioned, is about you taking a stock take of your own, a health check for your ethical compliance, ethical practices on farm. So based on your results from the online self-assessment, we would then provide you with a recommendation of training or not, depending, and you can take on that recommendation or not take on that recommendation. But the benefit of doing the Fair Farms training as it is it's more of a mentoring or coaching process in which the performance outcome of our trainers is to have confidence for you to pass audit. It's not for you to come away with a level 1 HR certificate or any kind of RTO requirement, because we know that that's not what growers need. More so, they need their practical to-do list of what they'll need to do to achieve a positive audit experience, I guess. So the Fair Farms training is optional there, but we would make the recommendation 1 or 2 hours. That would be $150 per hour, in which there are various options there. But what we found works best at the moment is the one-on-one training, in which it's more of a consult by way of, for WA, I expect it would be a virtual consult where we provide the trainer with the full online self-assessment results. We provide you with your online self-assessment results, coupled with a summary of your registration, gives our Fair Farms trainers a much deeper understanding of your practices, and therefore sets them up well to help you to proceed or get ready for audit. So audit, I've mentioned, audit is done by specialist social compliance auditors. Again, in that development phase of developing the Fair Farms pathway, we've kept this bar quite high. It's not any auditor that can undertake our audit. It is APSCA, Association of Professional Social Compliance Auditors. Both the auditing body and the auditors themselves have to be members of this, and they have the highest level of integrity and training. Each auditor has to pass 3 exams of 80% pass rate, and they have a deep understanding of social compliance issues. So the audit, again, there's an audit guide on our website, which shows you what is looked for in the audit. It would include interviews with a certain amount of workers, and it needs to be conducted during your peak season or when you've got production in full swing. So, a sample of pay slips, some interviews with workers takes place, and a social compliance audit occurs against our standard. What I'm quite proud to say is we have been able to carefully scope that audit to, depending how many workers and how complex, but it can be a half-day audit, for example, if there's less than 50 workers and no on-site accommodation. And we developed, the audit rules and the audit guide in conjunction with auditors, retailers and the markets alike. So we've carefully scoped that to keep it as low cost as possible. And once you've resolved your audit findings and corrective actions with the auditing body, then you would receive your certification. So the certification, depending on your audit outcomes, could be between 1 and 3 years. So again, in our audit rules is the numerical quantification of your audit findings, and then that would determine your 1 or 3 year cycle. After receiving your Fair Farms certification, to maintain your membership and registration with us, we do have a requirement for continuous learning and improvement. So we acknowledge that at the first outset, it is about awareness and being aware of your full ethical practices, but we do look at this as being a mechanism of improving grower practices and awareness of various topics. And so going forward, to maintain certification, there's a continuing professional development requirement of 2 hours, and you do repeat your online self-assessment. So that's, that allows for changes in HR managers or changes in rules. We know how often that changes, particularly in WA. So the online self-assessment is redone each year. and if it was, it should get quicker and quicker in theory. And then that would lead to a re-audit, resolve the findings and maintain your recertification. So as I mentioned, depending on the outcomes of the audit, it could be between 1 or 3 years. The good news is we've had the Fair Farms certification process endorsed, or I should say acknowledged, as meeting the ethical supply policies of the 3 major retailers. And as more and more consumers become aware and are aware of ethical practices and what that means to both workers and their own social and moral obligations, it's certainly a growing field. You may or may not be aware of the modern slavery requirements of larger organisations, and that is those of $100 million turnover. They now have to report on their modern slavery responses to throughout the supply chain. So it is a growing area in which, more eyes are upon us and how our food is and our supply chains operate. We're a national program. This is the current number of participants throughout Australia. I'm based over here in Queensland, so could that be? I'm going up to North Queensland next week and developing more there. And we have some 20 members in Western Australia who have jumped on board the Fair Farms program with us. Some just examples of areas where audits have picked up some issues. So business ethics, that employment is freely chosen, entitlement to work or eligibility to work, aka visas. One of the requirements we have about is almost levelling the playing field for workers as well. What you might ask of a visa holder, the eligibility to work equally applies to the local workforce. So we do look to seeking evidence of eligibility to work from Australians too. So just because you speak Australian, the obligation is actually written into the Migration Act of 1954 that your eligibility to work, i.e. your citizenship, so your passport or your 100 points of ID is shown of your eligibility to work. So a driver's license alone, in theory, is not sufficient. It should be coupled with a birth certificate and photographic evidence. And I mean, you as growers and businesses, you can maintain a log. You don't have to keep copies of people's personal information on file, but it is a requirement to check everybody's eligibility to work, not just those from other countries or on visas. Health, safety and hygiene is a biggie, probably because it's quite tangible, blocked exits, training of fire wardens, in-date first aid kits, the like. Opportunities for discipline and grievance complaints or anonymous reporting is another. Pay slips, working hours. Do appreciate that our industry is seasonal. However, in our standard, it's an 80-hour 80-hour limitation is generally the max, and that's kind of the industry standard that we've accepted in there. But it is all in the Fair Farms standard. It all starts from there. So I encourage you to jump on onto our website, fairfarms.com.au. If you go over to news or resources, you can sign up for our newsletter and have a look at the standard itself. And should it be appropriate for you, jump on and register and start your Fair Farm certification pathway, which demonstrates your ethical compliance practices to all your consumers. So I might leave it at that. If that suits everybody. Take questions.
Thanks, Marsha. That was great. I'm pretty sure we will have some questions from our learned friends. Without a doubt, Doriana has unmuted herself. Thank you very much. Doriana, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I've always been a supporter of the Fair Farms program because we've been under the SEDEX program, which I found to be completely over the top for what farming needs. However, there's a couple of things. Audits, although they might take half a day, when you're in remote regional locations, you have to add travel costs and those things onto that. And we always have difficulty in finding auditors that come to the more remote parts of Western Australia because we have, fewer farms than Queensland. In fact, this year we're struggling to get food safety auditors. And the other thing is for small growers, if you're only employing one person casually, occasionally, it seems that it's a lot of work for somebody who, so we have our growers, we're a cooperative and we have growers in our cooperative who are going, we're just not going to employ people. We're going to just grow what we can do without employing a single person because this is just getting too hard. So I wonder whether there should be some kind of a simpler system for people that employ, say, less than 5 people or less than 3 people. So the people that really just occasionally hire a backpacker, and it's just it doesn't require you to have, say, human rights policy and an ethics policy, and it just requires you to understand your obligations in accordance with the law in terms of the award you pay, working hours, and those sort of things. A lot of the there is obviously crossover between other programs, fresh care, ensuring that you have health and safety and induction programs. So a lot of the things that are covered in this are covered in that as well. And I guess the only other question I had or comment really is that I've seen quite a bit of media around the fact that very few farms have taken up Fair Farms and gone through. But I guess people need to understand that for those of us that are already under the SEDEX program, we've already gone through that pain and process of getting those accreditations through SEDEX, which means that we're not going to jump off that and into Fair Farms when we're already under one program. So there will be a gradual migration as I guess people come off SEDEX, but I think that the media that's been done needs to acknowledge that there are actually 2 ethical sourcing programs currently running in Australia. And whilst the Fair Farms uptake has been low, it will be because everyone who's been a coal supplier has been under SEDEX for at least the last sort of 4 or 5 years. So I'd like to see that being acknowledged a little bit more. That's sort of my comments.
Thank you, Doriana. That's terrific feedback on so many levels, in that, as I mentioned, we are a young standard and we are looking at kind of alternative means of inclusion and into the program. And for the small growers and remote, we are taking on a new audit body as we speak. We're doing the onboarding now with some training tomorrow. So by 2021 we'll have another audit body. Social compliance auditors are pretty scarce, but getting more of them and ensuring that there's adequate coverage for Australia is certainly a strategic goal of mine. And I very much appreciate your words. Pain and SEDEX is not the first time I've heard that put together. The media focus is an ongoing a battle that I'm not really wanting to get into the mud with them and deal with, but the fact that there are 2 ethical programs and it is a gradual migration, I very much appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. Was there any other questions from the floor? There's nothing in the chat. Okay, I will have one for you.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, Doriana, go.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, so Marsha, do you think it is a possibility that in order to make the program more inclusive for the future, to ensure that those smaller growers that don't employ a lot of people, but still do employ people and should be meeting their obligations, could participate in a Fair Farms Light type program, which would be, basically the first question is, how many people do you employ? And if it's less than 5 or less than 3, then this is a smaller program for you. Because I think, I'm not saying there are not issues with those smaller growers. There's probably more issues because they don't do it very often. And for that cohort, it's probably the training that's more important, if you like, than the audit. But do you think that is something that Fair Farms could look at in the future?
Yeah, with those growers that have particular like higher needs, be it cultural or language or the like, we are looking at the market aggregators and working with those. And I guess Fair Farms was born of a need to level up the playing field so that the good operators aren't the ones suffering amongst the bad reputation of few. So we do kind of have to get that trust built into the system and leveling up the playing field, whether you've got 1 or 10 or 100 workers. But if the aggregator of those said growers has a system in place to ensure that they are meeting ethical practices, I don't see why we can't in future kind of offer that flexibility, because it is at the buyer's request and demand, and how deeply we're looking into the supply chain that is driving the Fair Farms requirement. But in theory, the certification element of Fair Farms is optional, but it's the buyers or retailers who are requiring that, because we don't have that element of trust and level playing field at the moment. Does that make sense? So in theory, if you've got a small operator who is, as you mentioned, then getting on, registering, doing the RSA, doing the training, but not having that final step of third-party demonstration and certification against the standard, if that's sufficient to you that you feel it's under control, then in theory you can assume that risk on their behalf. But until we get to that kind of critical mass of trust and clarity throughout the supply chain, I guess the certification at all levels for all the reaches of the buyers is what persists.
Yeah, okay. So because as a cooperative, obviously we employ 25 people ourselves, and so obviously we have HR processes and all those things, but our members may employ nobody or one person occasionally. So it would be nice to get some oversight as to what they're doing, but without forcing them down that path of everybody having to have an audit and we can support them, like you say, with policies and procedures and that sort of thing. So yeah, it would be great to see that, so you can still ensure that they're doing the right thing, because obviously as a cooperative ourselves, we don't want to be brought down by our worst grower who may not be doing the right thing. So we want to have that oversight, but it's just about the balance.
Yeah, Doriana, and we have being still funded, and that's only until 2022. We have an external stakeholder reference group, which is retailers, growers, audit bodies, and the like. And this could be, a valuable feedback into that group as to further considerations on how we can improve and make practical, for the outcomes that we're all trying to achieve the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Doriana.
Marsha, it's Maureen Dobra here with my daughter Simone McLean. How are you doing?
Hi, Maureen. Hi, Simone.
Tell me, what roughly is an audit worth? What is it going to cost a grower?
Well, from what Doriana and others have said to me, the audit cost itself is one element, but it's the travel, depending on where you are, that kind of adds onto it. So Doriana might be able to comment better than I, depending on where you are, but it was $970 compared to, it was approximately half the price of the SEDEX audit, as I understood it.
Doriana, do you know? Is it just the flight to Carnarvon? I mean, you know that I'm in Gingin, so I'm just out of Perth.
Yeah, that's right. It's just it's the difficulty of getting auditors to Carnarvon, because generally if they're coming, they're doing one, and then they've got a whole day of travel generally each way, and accommodation. So you end up with 3 days of travel time, 3 days as opposed to one. So yeah.
So do they do the add the travel time separately to the audit?
I don't know, because we haven't used them. So, but I suspect they will, because they will, obviously they're paying somebody to come. So I know with Fresh Care, the Ausqual, they don't tend to add the travel time, because they consolidate it up into multiple audits and then build it into the cost of the audit. But if they're coming just for one, I'm pretty sure that they will charge you that travel time. And when we looked at the SEDEX audit, we couldn't even there wasn't even an auditor in WA. So yeah.
What I do encourage growers, and through associations such as AusVeg or other regional grower groups, because we know that the Fair Farms audit should occur at peak season, or when when your operations are in full swing, particularly for those seasonal items, you could club together and kind of reverse engineer the timing so that the one auditor could come out there and do a number of half days together, if that would help, Maureen.
Yeah, do you have some auditors in WA or?
So,
Do you have auditors in WA?
yeah, Ausqual is the is the sole certifying body that we use at the moment, but we will be taking on another, as I mentioned, where we'll be launching that. We're onboarding as we speak, which is a larger organisation.
So in this day and age, Marsha, with the Zoom technology that we have, why do we need to have them actually come and be on the farm?
Yeah, I'm into remote, having a food safety background myself, and looking at alternate models to auditing. Like, to me, auditing is just a reverse facing single snapshot in time, and there are other means of digital, integration and the like. However, particularly for social compliance audit, where you've got to take interviews and look to see within context of an organisation, I don't believe it will go to remote anytime soon.
Right. I mean, we lodge our taxes, remotely. We do our banking remotely. And certainly we could do Zoom with with our employees. We could step out of the office and still do a Zoom, and you could still interview them. I think in this day and age, we've got to look at that rather than being on farm.
Yeah, well, I can raise the question, and you wouldn't be cattle prodding them under the table or anything like that, would you, Maureen?
No. I'd give them chockies and champagne and feed them while they're here talking to you.
It does.
That's it, Melissa, I do. All right, so I mean, that I think that would be something to take up. But as I said, you have no idea what an audit does cost if just going to somebody's place without flights and accommodation. How much per hour is an audit?
Well, for the audit as it is, and I've got a comparison between us and ZX using the Ausqual model, I think it was $970.
$970, righto, yep. And that was up for half a day?
Yes.
Yep, okay. So I would be with Doriana, with the smaller growers, and certainly the growers that don't supply the big supermarkets. I would ask why they would need to be audited, even if they followed the Fair Farms. Why do they need to be audited?
I agree. They don't need to be. You could be on the Fair Farms pathway, learning about the things that you need to do, assuring, knowing in your heart that you've got these practices. So for me, it's about awareness, provision, and then commitment. So the first step is awareness, and that's why you do the OSA. So then after you do the OSA, you know all the rules and requirements you would or should or be abiding by. Awareness, provision. So then, are you doing all the things on your farm? Do you have the policies in place? Are all the things being there? And then commitment is, you can show that through a third party, but if you know in your heart, it's the same with HACCP, it's the same with any form of certification. If people were going and doing the right thing, we wouldn't have to have third party certification. That's how I did a master's in HACCP, because I didn't believe in it. It was an argument that I had to have with myself as to why do you need HACCP if you're providing food safely, you shouldn't have to have a HACCP certification for it. So that's my own kind of context behind it. But yes, you can certainly jump on board the Fair Farms pathway, do everything all the way up to, but you won't be bumping up my numbers of my 30 certified growers at the end. But for me, it's not all about the numbers. It's about creating behaviour change and a level playing field for all those who are trying to do the right thing, and consumers expect the right thing. And you can do that without having an expensive third-party audit, in my personal opinion.
Certainly, Marsha, there are some of the growers over here that, like I said to you before, do not supply the larger supermarkets. They supply the smaller retail, the fruit and veg, the corner stores. They don't require HACCP. They don't require anything, and they will continue to do that. They won't have any QA whatsoever. And, and they keep going on. So, but the Fair Farms, if they can download that and use that as a guide, that would be very good.
Definitely. Yeah. Go right ahead. I'd be happy to, take this offline and talk you through that process if to have another little ongoing kind of training or awareness session with you guys.
We have had a question in the chat, Marsha. I'm just confirming, if you are a wholesaler that buys direct from growers, only the wholesaler who sells direct to the chains need to have the Fair Farm certification.
So this depends on the buyer who's requiring it. So as I mentioned, modern slavery obligations are pushing their way through our supply chain, just saying, what are you doing to mitigate the risks of modern slavery, let's say. So how the reportees respond to that isn't really necessarily being assessed, and they're doing that to as hard or as soft as they're going, but it depends on who's asking for that, how far down the chain you want to look. So it could well be Coles, for example, is looking at first tier. They've copped some criticism from the negative media and the like. So one step can certainly be enough. 2 steps might be better. All the way through supply chain might be best. So it can be that first step.
I think, just on a comment on that, reading the media and the statements by Coles and Woolworths over the last couple of weeks, it does appear that they are moving more towards accrediting the entire supply chain and taking it down to further levels, which is, I guess, where my concern is that you are just not going to get those growers that employ one person over a busy season, obviously going through that process to get accredited and audited, because the overhead of the time and cost for a small producer is too high. And I think that, given that appears to be the direction that the retailers are going to be heading in, that deeper reach into the supply chain, that the conversation, how viable and realistic is it for those small producers to achieve that, and what's the risk of that? Because risk versus the cost of doing it as well for the retailers. So yeah.
All right, do we have any further questions? Nothing coming through on the chat. Everyone's still muted.
Right, Melissa.
Yes, Maureen.
In our business, so we purchase from other growers. So do you think that we would be asking other growers for their Fair Farms accreditation? However, in saying that, we do ask them for their Fresh Care certificate. So would you think that would be a logic thing, that we would have to go through that as well?
I guess it depends on what's coming back to you from Coles and Woolworths and the other retailers.
No, it's not. No, Melissa, the idea is that we're buying from other growers, and
right.
we're processing it ourselves. So, that's like a wholesaler buying it from a grower. So that's what we virtually are. Being a grower, we're buying it from another grower. And when each year we ask them for their Fresh Care certificate. So do we have to expect that they have Fair Farms as well? What would you think, Marsha?
Yeah, again, I guess it's the intention with which and the risk that you're willing to assume, and your trust and your knowledge of their practices. It's up to you as a business owner at this time. But if you're taking an honest look at your own practices and then sourcing from others, a good start, as I mentioned, would be they can have an awareness of the same amount that you could have an awareness, and if upon that you're satisfied with that without that expensive step of certification, then you've done an element of due diligence, I'd say. But you don't want it just done lip service for the sake of doing lip service. I'm looking at genuine kind of awareness of the right thing. It's about people treating other people decently, and we talk and hear about the negative stories. So growers also think about it. If your child was on the other side of the world and in a remote location, because grow values and the way we treat people is obviously often an extension of our own values in our home setting because it's so close to, the growers and their sites are so close. So that would be a decision up to you. And the inclusion in the Fair Farms process is a good first step, and it's a tangible, you can say, you're aware of the same requirements, because it is about that awareness, provision, and then commitment. And once you've got that confidence in your supply chain, I guess.
And we've got silence again, which is fantastic. So it is obviously coming up to 11:15 now. If there is no further questions, I think we might wrap up. Marsha's contact details obviously will be sent through in the follow-up email to our webinar. We'll also be posting this through our e-news and also onto our YouTube page as well. So it will also be there for review at a further stage. Vegetables WA would encourage everyone to get in contact with Marsha if they do have any very specific and direct questions. Obviously, we know it is quite a technical area and the details that come with it. Marsha obviously is our relevant expert, and we would defer to her. But we all know that we're all about doing the right thing, and that's why everyone's here for today. And that's what we obviously encourage our growers to do on a regular basis, which we believe they do. But obviously, if we can get that audit/certification, even like you just said, the online checklist done, we obviously then have some backup research. And like we said, hand on heart, we know we've done the right thing.
Yeah, I'd encourage everybody through, if you're a part of your peak industry body, so they know your commodity best, and if it's not kind of fitting quite right, or if there's feedback through there, that provides that kind of support network and regional kind of perspective and relevance and timeliness. And then it comes to me in a kind of coordinated fashion, and we can focus on particular commodities. So I thank you very much, Veg WA, for your time. I would revert to you guys too. If you hear anything from your members, we could, run a follow-up, or with the aggregation of queries and concerns, it's only then do I get, meaningful feedback such as I've got today, and then I could help at a greater scale, I guess. So thank you, Veg WA, for hosting today.
Thanks very much, Marsha. We look forward to working with you again.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you, Marsha.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.